Okay, so you want to own a private jet. Skip the security line, park a few feet from the stairs, climb aboard, and take off whenever you feel like it. No layovers, no crowds, no shoes in a plastic bin, no waiting at a gate for a delayed connection. Your schedule, your route, your rules. It sounds like the purest thing money can buy, which is not a product at all, but time itself. And in a way, that's exactly what it is. The problem is everything that happens between that fantasy and the reality. What it actually costs to get in. What it costs just to keep the thing sitting in a hangar doing nothing. What happens the moment you try to make it earn its keep. And why some of the wealthiest people on the planet, people who could write a check for 3 of these tomorrow, deliberately choose never to own one outright. The story of how a private jet actually makes and loses money is stranger than almost anyone imagines, because the airplane is the one part of the equation that matters least. Let's start with the sticker price, because even that is not one number. It's a range so wide, it barely describes the same category of object. At the bottom, a single-engine turboprop, like a Pilatus PC-12, can be had new for somewhere around $5 to $6 million. A very light jet or an entry-level light jet, a Cessna Citation or an Embraer Phenom 300, runs closer to $9 or $10 million. Step up to a mid-size cabin where you can actually stand up and cross a continent without stopping, and you're at $15 to $20 million. A super mid-size, a Challenger 350 or a Citation Longitude, $25 to $30. And at the top of the market, the ultra-long-range machines that fly 14 hours non-stop, a Gulfstream G700 or a Bombardier Global 7500, the price tag lands somewhere north of $75 million for a single airplane, for one owner. And here's the first thing that separates this from almost any other luxury purchase. That number is not the cost. It's the deposit on the cost, because before you take delivery, there's a layer of expense that catches nearly every first-time buyer completely off guard. If you're buying used, and most buyers do, you don't just wire the money and get the keys. You pay for a pre-purchase inspection where mechanics tear into the aircraft's records and airframe looking for corrosion, damage history, and deferred maintenance, and that inspection alone can run into 6 figures before you've bought anything. You inherit the logbooks, good or bad, exactly the way a mall owner inherits the leases. Then there's sales and use tax, which on a multi-million-dollar asset can be one of the single largest line items of the entire transaction, sometimes millions of dollars depending on where the aircraft is based and registered. There's registration, there's the cost of bringing the interior and avionics up to current standards, and if you want the cabin refinished to your taste, a full refurbishment on a large jet can cost several $1,000,000 all by itself. You have not flown anywhere yet. You have simply bought the right to start spending. And now we arrive at the trap at the center of this entire business. The purchase price, the thing everyone fixates on, is the cheap part. It's the part you pay once. Everything else you pay forever, whether the airplane flies or not. This is the single most important sentence in private aviation, so read it slowly. A jet costs almost the same to own sitting in a hangar as it does flying across the country, because the largest costs are fixed. They don't care how much you use it. Start with the crew. A jet certified for 2 pilots needs 2 pilots, and not the kind you hire off a website. They need a type rating specific to your exact aircraft, a certification that costs tens of thousands of dollars per pilot and has to be renewed with recurrent training every 6 to 12 months, often at a specialized simulator center. 2 full-time professional pilots for a mid-sized jet will cost you somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000 a year in salary alone, and for a large cabin aircraft with senior captains, considerably more. If you fly internationally or want backup coverage, you're paying for more than 2. On a big jet, you may also be paying a dedicated flight attendant. These people get paid the same in a year you fly 200 hours as a year you fly 40. And the salary is just the base of it. Every time the jet overnights somewhere away from home, you're paying for the crew's hotel rooms, their meals, their per-diems, and often a rental car, on your dime, in whatever city the trip stranded them in. Pilots also operate under strict duty and rest limits, legal ceilings on how long they can work and fly in a stretch, so a single long day or a weather delay can force an unplanned overnight, which means an unplanned hotel bill and a schedule you no longer fully control. If you fly enough, or far enough, you're not employing two pilots. You're employing a small, rotating roster of them so somebody legal and rested is always available, and every one of those people is a salary, a training bill, and a benefits package that keeps arriving whether the airplane moves or not. Then there's the hangar. You do not leave a $50 million aircraft parked outside in the weather. Hangar space at a busy metropolitan airport runs anywhere from a few $1,000s a month for a light jet to well over $10,000 for a large one, and in space-constrained markets, far more. Add insurance, which covers both the hull, the value of the aircraft itself, and liability, the far scarier number, because a jet accident is a catastrophic loss event. Premiums range from tens of thousands to well over $100,000 a year, and they've been climbing across the whole industry. Then there's the management company, because unless you personally want to schedule crews, track maintenance compliance, handle regulatory paperwork, and negotiate fuel contracts, you hire a firm to run the aircraft for you, and they charge a monthly management fee on top of everything else. None of this has anything to do with flying. This is the cost of ownership existing. Now the airplane actually leaves the ground, and a second meter starts running. Fuel first. A mid-sized jet burns somewhere between 200 and 300 gallons of jet fuel an hour. A large cabin jet closer to 400 or 500, and at the prices charged at private terminals, a single transcontinental flight can burn through many thousands of dollars in fuel one way. Then, landing fees, ramp fees, and handling charges at every airport you touch. Overnight parking away from base, catering, de-icing in winter, which on a large aircraft can cost thousands per application, navigation and international overflight fees. And when people in the industry add all of this together, fixed costs plus variable costs divided by the hours actually flown, they arrive at a number that shocks almost everyone. The all-in cost per flight hour for a light jet is commonly somewhere around $2,000 to $4,000. For a large cabin, long-range jet, it can run $8,000 to $13,000 an hour or more. And here is the counterintuitive detail buried inside that math, the same detail that ruins the economics for a lot of owners. The less you fly, the more each hour costs. Because all those fixed costs, the crew, the hangar, the insurance, the management, get divided across fewer hours. An owner who flies 50 hours a year is paying a staggering amount per hour of actual use. The airplane is cheapest, per hour, for the person who flies it constantly, and most private owners don't fly it constantly. And there's a whole category of cost that most first-time buyers never see coming until the bill lands, because it doesn't arrive monthly, and it doesn't arrive with the fuel. It arrives on a schedule written by the manufacturer and the regulator, and you don't get a vote. Aircraft maintenance runs on a calendar and an hour count at the same time. Certain inspections come due every so many flight hours, others every so many months or years, regardless of use, and the big ones, the heavy checks where mechanics essentially take major sections of the airplane apart and put them back together, can pull your jet out of service for weeks and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in a single event. The engines are their own universe. Most serious owners enroll each engine on an hourly cost program, effectively a maintenance insurance plan where you pay a set fee for every hour flown, and the program covers overhauls and major repairs. It smooths the cost, but it doesn't remove it, and those programs bill you by the hour flown quietly in the background, on top of everything else. Then there's the part nobody plans for, the aircraft on-ground event, where a single failed component grounds the jet and a specialized part has to be flown in from across the country while your multi-million-dollar machine sits useless. And here's the resale twist that ties it all together. The same way a mall owner inherits the leases. When you go to sell, the first thing a serious buyer checks is whether the engines are on program and whether the maintenance status is current. An identical aircraft with its engines enrolled on an hourly program can be worth dramatically more than one that isn't, because the buyer is inheriting your maintenance decisions, good or bad, exactly the way you inherited the last owners. The airplane isn't just an airplane. It's a rolling record of every dollar someone did or didn't spend to keep it healthy. And here's a layer of the business almost no first-time owner thinks about until they're standing in it. When you fly private, you don't walk through the main terminal. You land at a separate private facility called a fixed base operator, an FBO, a sort of boutique airport within the airport with a lounge, a ramp, fuel trucks, and a crew to marshal your jet in and handle your bags. And the FBO is a business, a very good one, built on exactly the same logic as the shop's past airport security. It makes most of its money on fuel, buying jet fuel wholesale and selling it to you at a markup that can be substantial, dollars per gallon on top of the base price, times hundreds of gallons per fill. Add ramp fees, handling fees, overnight parking, and a facility charge just for the privilege of using the lounge. For you, the owner, every one of these is a cost. For whoever owns the FBO, every landing is a toll booth, and they collect it from every jet that touches down, whether the owner is a billionaire or a charter guest. This is why serious operators negotiate fuel contract programs and join buying networks that shave the margin down, because the difference between paying retail fuel prices and contract fuel prices across a few hundred hours a year is real money. Every time your beautiful airplane kisses the runway, it lands directly into someone else's revenue statement. So faced with a machine that costs millions a year, whether it moves or not, owners do the obvious thing. They try to make it earn. And this is where private aviation develops a second business hiding inside the first one, exactly the way an airport builds a shopping mall inside the terminal. The most common move is to put your aircraft onto a charter certificate, what the regulations call Part 135, and let a charter operator sell your empty airplane to other people when you're not using it. In the eyes of the law, this is a meaningful line. Fly it yourself and you're operating under Part 91, private rules. Rent it out to strangers for money and you cross into Part 135, commercial rules, with a heavier layer of maintenance requirements, inspections, and pilot rules. That regulatory upgrade costs money, but the revenue is real. A light jet might charter for $3,000 to $5,000 an hour, a mid-size for $5,000 to $8,000, a large cabin jet for $10,000 to $15,000 or more. Sounds like the problem solves itself. It does not. Here's what the brochures don't tell you. Charter revenue rarely covers the full cost of ownership. The charter operator takes a cut, often a substantial percentage of every dollar. The additional flying puts wear on the aircraft, which accelerates maintenance and depreciation, and you don't control the schedule the way you imagine, because a jet earning charter income has to be available when paying customers want it, not just when you do. Most owners who charter their aircraft are not turning a profit. They are offsetting a loss. They're taking a machine that bleeds $2 million a year and clawing back some fraction of it and calling that a win, which, honestly, it often is. But it is not the money machine people picture. There's a wrinkle buried inside charter that exposes just how strange the physics of this business really is, and it's called the empty leg. A jet, unlike a car, can't be left wherever the last trip ended and picked up later. If a charter customer flies from New York to Miami, the airplane is now in Miami, but the next customer or the owner might need it back in New York or somewhere else entirely. So the jet flies back empty. No passengers, no revenue, full fuel burn, full wear, 2 pilots on the clock, just an expensive machine hauling itself across the sky with nobody in the cabin. These are called empty legs, or positioning flights, or in the older language, deadhead flights, and they are a genuinely enormous share of all private jet flying. A meaningful chunk of the hours on many jets are flown with the seats empty, simply moving the airplane to where it needs to be next. Operators try to sell these empty legs at steep discounts to anyone whose schedule happens to line up, which is why you'll occasionally see shockingly cheap private jet deals, a fraction of the normal rate, because the airplane was going to make that flight empty anyway, and any dollar is better than zero. But for the owner, every positioning flight is pure cost, an hour of the machine's finite life and a tank of fuel spent going nowhere. The airplane doesn't teleport to your door. Somebody, usually you, pays for it to get there. Then there's the version of ownership that most people who fly private actually use, and it's the cleverest financial structure in the entire industry. Most people who fly on a private jet today don't own one, the same way most people who own a shopping mall today don't own it directly. They own a slice. It's called fractional ownership, and the company that built the model into a giant is NetJets, which has been owned since 1998 by Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway. Here's how it works. Instead of buying a whole aircraft, you buy a share, 1/16th, 1/8th, 1/4 of a specific jet. A 1/16th share typically entitles you to around 50 occupied flight hours a year. You pay for your share up front, you pay a fixed monthly management fee, and you pay an occupied hourly rate every time you actually fly. In exchange, you never deal with a single pilot schedule, a single maintenance bill, or a single hangar lease. And the magic underneath it is the same magic that lets a small investor own part of 100 malls through a real estate trust. The fractional company owns a whole fleet, so when you want to fly, they don't send your specific airplane, they send the nearest available one of that type. Your capital is spread across the fleet's risk instead of concentrated in one tail number sitting in one hangar depreciating whether you fly or not. For most people who need 80 or 100 hours a year, the fractional math beats full ownership so decisively that owning the whole airplane stops making financial sense at all. And there's the question almost nobody asks out loud, which is how you even pay for the thing, because virtually nobody writes a single check for tens of millions of dollars in cash. Jets get financed, just like houses, only stranger. A bank will lend against the aircraft with the aircraft itself as collateral, but lenders are cautious in a way they never are with a house, because a house can't fire up its engines and fly to another continent, and a house doesn't lose a big share of its value the moment the market cools. So aircraft loans tend to demand meaningful down payments and shorter terms, and the lender watches the collateral's value nervously the whole way. Then there's the other path, the operating lease, where you never own the jet at all. A leasing company owns it, and you pay to use it for a fixed term and hand it back at the end, which sounds like renting because it essentially is. The trade is precise and it matters. Buy the airplane and you capture the depreciation tax benefit, but you also eat all the residual value risk, the danger that it's worth far less than you hoped when you sell. Lease the airplane and you hand that residual risk to someone else, but you forfeit the big write-off and you build no equity in the machine. So the lease-versus-buy decision, the one that looks like boring paperwork, is really a bet on a single question. Where do you think this aircraft's value is going? Get that bet right and the financing structure quietly makes you money. Get it wrong, and it's one more way the airplane costs more than the number on the invoice. So why does anyone buy the whole airplane? Two reasons, and the second one is the real engine of this entire industry. The first is control and volume. If you fly 400 or 500 hours a year, if you need a specific cabin configured a specific way, if you want your own crew who know exactly how you take your coffee, full ownership starts to win. But the second reason is taxes, and it is enormous. For years, under United States tax law, a business that bought a qualifying aircraft and used it primarily for business could deduct an extraordinary share of the entire purchase price in the very first year through what's called bonus depreciation. At its peak, following the 2017 tax law, that figure was 100%. Buy a $20 million jet, use it more than half the time for legitimate business, and you could write the whole $20 million against your income in year one. That is not a discount. For a high-income business owner, that is the government absorbing a massive chunk of the purchase price in the form of taxes never paid. And here's the trapdoor under that floor. The rules that make it so attractive are exactly the rules that get owners into serious trouble. The deduction depends on business use, and the moment you start flying the family to a vacation home, that's personal use, which is not deductible, and which the tax authorities scrutinize aggressively. Owners are required to track every single flight, business versus personal, and value the personal trips as income to whoever took them. Get the ratio wrong, drop below the business use threshold, and the depreciation you already claimed can come clawing back. That bonus depreciation percentage has also been scheduled to phase down over time, and it has swung with each new tax law, so the deal that made the numbers work the year you bought may not exist the year you sell. An enormous share of full ownership purchases are driven not by a love of flying, but by a spreadsheet showing a tax benefit. And a benefit written into tax law is a benefit that a future law can take away. There's one more hidden layer that shows just how much of this business is financial engineering wearing the costume of an airplane, and it's the question of where the jet legally lives. Every aircraft carries a registration, a tail number, tied to a specific country, and that country is a choice, not an accident. Plenty of jets that rarely touch American soil wear a United States registration, the familiar N number, and plenty of others are registered in small specialist jurisdictions, places like the Isle of Man, Aruba, the Cayman Islands, or San Marino, that have built entire aircraft registries as a business. Why go to the trouble? Because the flag on the tail affects taxes, import duties, privacy, the ease of financing, and how simple the aircraft is to sell to a buyer in another country later. A registry that's respected worldwide and politically neutral makes the jet more liquid, more financeable, and less entangled, which can add real value at resale. And this isn't free either. You're paying advisors, lawyers, and management companies to set up and maintain the structure, to keep it compliant, and to navigate the customs and import rules of every place the jet actually operates. Then there's the operating reality that comes with flying internationally at all. Overflight and navigation fees charged by every country's airspace you cross, crew duty, and rest rules that can force you to carry extra pilots, customs and immigration handling at each border, and higher costs everywhere. The jet is a stranger. The airplane you thought you bought to feel free turns out to live inside a web of jurisdictions, registries, and rules. And managing that web is its own permanent line on the budget. Now, the depreciation that helps you on the tax return has an evil twin on the resale lot, and this is where fortunes quietly evaporate. An aircraft is a depreciating asset, and for most models, the value curve points down. A jet can lose a large share of its value over its first decade, and some models fare far worse than others. Aircraft from manufacturers that stay strong, with good support and steady demand, a Gulfstream, a top Bombardier, tend to hold value reasonably well. But an airplane whose manufacturer stumbles or whose model falls out of favor can shed value at a frightening pace. The saying in the industry, cleaned up a little, is that the two happiest days are the day you buy it and the day you sell it. And the gap between those 2 days is where the real money is lost, not in fuel, not in crew, but in the slow, silent bleed of a multi-million-dollar asset, becoming worth less every year it sits on your books. To understand how badly this can go and how a beautiful idea in this business can end in bankruptcy, it helps to look at one real story from launch to collapse. In the early 2000s, a company called Eclipse Aviation set out to do something that sounded revolutionary. They were going to democratize private flight. Their aircraft, the Eclipse 500, was a very light jet, small, twin-engine, and radically cheaper than anything in its class, priced when it was announced at around $1 million, a fraction of what a business jet cost. The founder, Vern Reburn, a technology veteran, promised to bring Silicon Valley manufacturing thinking to aviation and build these jets by the thousands. And the vision didn't stop at selling airplanes. A partner company called Dayjet planned to use fleets of these little jets as an air taxi service, an on-demand network where you'd book a seat between smaller cities the way you'd hail a cab, bypassing the big hub airports entirely. Investors poured in enormous sums. Thousands of orders were placed. It was going to be the airplane that finally made private flight affordable for the merely well-off instead of only the rich. Then reality arrived, piece by piece, the way it always does. The jets cost far more to build than promised. The price crept up and up, away from that magic $1 million number that had made the whole concept work. certification and production dragged on. The company burned through cash at a ferocious rate. And then, in 2008, the global financial crisis hit at the worst possible moment, exactly when a company dependent on constant new investment and constant new orders needed both to keep flowing. Dayjet, the air taxi dream that was supposed to prove there was a bottomless market for these little jets, ran out of money and shut down in September of 2008. Weeks later, Eclipse Aviation itself filed for bankruptcy. The factory stopped. And here is the part that makes this a finance story and not just a startup story. The people who had already taken delivery of their Eclipse 500s, who had paid real money for a real airplane, suddenly owned an orphan. The manufacturer that was supposed to supply parts, support the warranty, and stand behind the aircraft was gone. Resale values collapsed because who wants an airplane whose maker no longer exists? Owners were left holding a machine that was worth a fraction of what they'd paid, difficult to maintain, and haunted by the ghost of a company that promised to change the world and instead just changed their balance sheets. Keep that story in mind whenever you hear that some new aircraft is going to make private flight cheap and easy. Eclipse wasn't a bad airplane. The idea wasn't stupid. The math simply didn't survive contact with what it actually costs to build, support, and sustain a flying machine over decades. The failure wasn't one dramatic event. It was a sequence of smaller ones, each making the next more likely, until the whole structure that depended on cheap production and endless demand pulled the floor out from under everyone who had trusted it. The Eclipse collapse happened against a backdrop that has whipsawed this entire industry. For most of its history, private aviation was a small, steady world for corporations and the very wealthy. Then came 2020, when commercial airlines cut schedules and crowded terminals became something people feared. Demand for private flight exploded. First-time buyers flooded the market, used jet inventory dried up, and prices for pre-owned aircraft spiked to levels the industry had never seen, sometimes above what the jets had cost new. It looked, for a moment, like the value curve had permanently bent upward. Then it normalized, the way these things always do. Inventory returned, the frenzy cooled, and prices drifted back toward Earth, leaving some of the people who bought at the very top holding aircraft worth less than they paid. The lesson underneath the boom and the bust is the same lesson underneath the whole business. The airplane's value is a bet on demand you don't control, and demand can turn faster than a multi-million-dollar asset can be sold. So does owning a private jet actually work? The honest answer, exactly like the mall and the airport and the bank, depends entirely on scale and use, and the gap between the good outcome and the bad one is enormous. In the optimistic scenario, you're a business that genuinely needs to move people to places commercial airlines don't serve, on schedules that create real economic value, flying enough hours that the per-hour cost stays sane. The tax treatment works in your favor. You either fly enough to justify full ownership, or you're smart enough to use fractional shares or charter for the hours you actually need. The aircraft is a tool that buys back something you can never make more of, which is time. And for a person whose time is worth more per hour than the jet costs per hour, the whole thing pencils out. This is the version that makes private aviation one of the most valuable tools a serious business can own. In the realistic bad scenario, you bought the airplane for the fantasy and the tax deduction, and then you fly it 60 hours a year. The crew gets paid regardless. The hangar bill arrives regardless. Insurance renews, higher than last year. The engine program bills you by the hour for reserves whether you're flying or not. Your management company sends its monthly fee. You try to charter it out to recover some of the cost, and after the operator's cut and the extra wear, you're still deep in the red. The tax law that justified the purchase shifts under you. And all the while, the asset itself is quietly losing value on your books, so that the day you finally sell, you discover the largest cost of all was the one you never saw on any monthly statement, the millions of dollars of value the airplane simply shed while it sat in the hangar being beautiful. Neither of these scenarios is exotic. Both of them happen constantly, sometimes to the same person who bought in the first mood and woke up in the second. Here is what a private jet actually is: underneath the leather and the polished aluminum. It looks from the outside like the ultimate asset, a possession so expensive it must be an investment. From the inside, it's the opposite. It's a machine engineered to convert money into time, and it does that job extraordinarily well, but only in one direction. It is not a store of value. It is a store of freedom, and freedom, it turns out, has a monthly bill. The crew, the hangar, the insurance, the fuel, the maintenance, the depreciation, all of it runs whether you're at 35,000 feet or asleep at home, and the airplane doesn't care which. So if you do decide to buy one, understand what you're actually buying. You are not buying an airplane. You are not buying an asset that grows. You are buying the single most expensive way in the world to never wait in a line again. In the right hands, at the right scale, for a person whose hours are worth more than the machine can burn, that is one of the best trades money can make. For everyone else, it is the most beautiful way ever invented to watch a fortune take off and never quite come back.